Great people of Africa, lovers of freedom all over the world. Of course, while we are on the quest for our freedom, we must always bring back whatever that transpired that concerns us, and we bring it down and break it down to the layman understanding. That's exactly what I am trying to do. The news coming out of the world. Of course, we all must have seen that South Africa took Israel to ICJ, International Criminal Justice, where you actually report the genocide if there is any sign of genocide committed, or if you want to sue anybody for the case of genocide, you go to ICJ, International Criminal Justice. Now South Africa took Israel to International Criminal Justice on the alleged genocide that is being reported against the Palestinian people by the Israel. So now, what I find very interesting in this news, it is the 57 Islamic State that are actually backing them up. Now I want you to know that I am not against the move made by South Africa, because it takes a lot of courage for a nation to stand up and back up people for the sake of humanity. It is actually a good move that South Africa made with a lot of courage. It is not every country in the world that will take that risk, come out and face those who are actually against you. And the South African government, they did it, and they need to be applauded, because what they did is actually done with a lot of courage. They took it upon themselves, and they took Israel to ICJ, and many countries of the world rallied around them and gave them their support. But the interesting story behind it, the reason why I am actually bringing it to our screen, it is because it says 57 countries, Islamic states, supported South Africa. So now what I am trying to do right now, it is for us to find out which countries made up of these 57 Islamic states that supported South Africa on the case against the alleged genocide being committed by Israel against the people of Palestine. Now let us read the news of Al Jazeera. Let us read the news from Al Jazeera. Now listen very attentively. Which countries back South Africa's genocide case against Israel at ICJ? ICJ rather. Now it says, here are countries which welcome the ICJ case that says Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. Now, we continue to read. The International Court of Justice, the International Court of Justice, not criminal justice. The International Court of Justice, based in Hague, will hold its first hearing in South Africa's genocide case against Israel on Thursday, which took place last week, Thursday. Of course, we are actually doing it after the court case. Now, it says, with several countries welcoming the move amid a global chorus for a ceasefire in Gaza, South Africa filed the lawsuit end of December, accusing Israel of genocide in its war on Gaza and seeking hold on the brutal military assault that has killed more than 23,000 Palestinians. Nearly 10,000 of them are children. Quite interesting. Now, the 84-page filing by South Africa says Israel violated the 1948 Genocide Convention drawn up the aftermath of the World War II and the Holocaust. All right. Both Israel and South Africa are signatory to the United Nations Genocide Convention, which gives the ICG the highest UN legal body jurisdiction to rule on the dispute over the treaty. All states that sign the convention are obliged to not commit genocide and also to prevent and punish it. The treaty defines genocide as act committed with intent to destroy in a whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Here's what we know about the countries backing South Africa in its case against Israel. Remember that I hope you paid attention to what I said, to what I read about Commission of Genocide, which of course you know that it happened to us. So that is why we are very, very keen, in actually bringing this to your, in front of the world and reminding them that such genocide happened to us. And we are very interested in anything about genocide in the world and how the world is managing it, how the world is treating it. Then we will now present our own case. Now, let us continue. It says, and the countries that oppose the case at the World Court. Let's listen to the countries. The Organization of Islamic Countries, OIC, the 57-member bloc. The 57-member bloc, which includes Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, and Morocco, voiced their support for the case on December 30. Now, 57-member bloc are OIC, which is the Organization of Islamic Countries, which includes Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, Morocco, voiced their support. These are the people who voiced their support. Now, I think let me read further a bit then before we go and find out which countries are in this 57-member bloc of the Islamic State. Now, of course, some of the countries, they support them without voicing a support. Now, first of all, let us go into the list of Islamic OIC, those countries that made up OIC. That's what I am bringing in front of you. The countries that made up OIC. I want to bring it in front of us so that we will see it and find out if there is any country that is familiar to you that is made up of OIC, Islamic State. Organization of Islamic State. I am scrolling down. Let us find out if there is a country you may know. 57 countries that made up OIC. Okay, I think I have found something. I found a country that I may know. Let me zoom it a bit so that you will see it yourself. Are you seeing it? The 13th in number. Nigeria is the part of the 57 countries of Islamic State. Now, of course, they say 57 countries of Islamic State gave their support. Now, that means automatically whether Nigeria is quiet or whether Nigeria is actually silent, they are part of the OIC. And I want you to understand that Nigeria being part of the OIC makes Nigeria recognized as an Islamic state. So that's why they see every other person as minority. And that is the reason why probably you see the Fulanese trying to dip Quran in the Atlantic Ocean to make sure that they capture that place, because it is an Islamic state. They just want to make it known to you that it is an Islamic state. It is now from 2021, during the time of Buhari, you will understand that we actually lamented about these people making it actually official that Nigeria is an Islamic state. We fought it and we know that it's still ongoing. It is already gazetted. Nigeria is an Islamic state. It is not a religious nation. It is an Islamic state recognized. It is part of the 57 Islamic bloc, OIC. Right? It is part of it. So it is part of the OIC that actually supported the move by South Africa. Believe you me, the moves by South Africa is actually, it takes a lot of courage for a nation to do so, and they actually, carried those out at their own expense, and they are actually supporting humanity. That's exactly the move that South Africa made. It is not people hiding behind a block and giving their support. This is what you call humanitarian support. Now, you will be wondering, how could Nigeria be part of the 57 OIC bloc, which is Organization of Islamic States, that supported the move by South Africa against Israel, claiming that, or alleging that, alleging will be the better word for it, that they have committed a genocide against the people of Palestine. Now, that move shows us that the 57 countries made up of many countries, including Nigeria, green, white, green. Of course, you can see it right in front of you, the highlighted area of this post in front of you. Now, what is actually quite interesting in this, Nigeria being part of the 57 country is, let me go there. The reason why I find this news quite fascinating. Let's go there. I want us to go to the Nigeria genocide against Biafra. That's where we are heading straight. Nigeria genocide against the Biafran people in 1967 to 1970. The Genocide Convention, which took place in 9th of December, or I don't know if I am very good with this, chronology. 9th of December, 1948. It took place. There was a convention that actually people gathered together, nations came together to stand against commission of genocide in no matter the provocation. Genocide may not be committed against anybody, against a race, against organization, and genocide is prohibited in this world that me and you are living. From the year 1948, but the year 1967, there was a genocide against the Biafran people. Now, there is a good media. There is a good media which actually carried out the information of such genocide that was committed against the Biafran people, my people, 1967 to 1970, the genocide against the Biafran people. Now, do you know those who carried it out? The good media. The good media who carried it out is Daily Maverick. Daily Maverick is the good media who did the documentary. Of course, BBC was the media that was on ground whilst all these things were taking place. But now let us go to the Daily Maverick, the good media, who took it upon themselves to carry out this genocide documentary. Now let us read before we bring more analysis and throw more light to it. Now I want you to understand that the reason why I am doing this is because it is genocide committed against our people. 1967, the convention took place in the 9th of December 1948, and there are many countries become signatory to the genocide, but because the genocide committed against the Biafran people were premeditated, Now I am going to show you the year Nigeria joined the Genocide Convention, become the signatory to the Genocide Convention. Whether they were signatory to Genocide Convention or not, there is a path. There is a section of the Genocide Convention that says whether you are a member, a signatory, you are going to be punished when you commit a genocide. Now, let us read exactly what happened to the Biafran people after 1948, the Genocide Convention took place, and there was a law enacted that there would be no condoning of genocide of any kind in this world that we are living. Now, but in 1967, let us read. On the 50th anniversary of the end of the Biafran War, the world's worst humanitarian crisis in the late 1960s, declassified British files show that Harold Wilson's government secretly armed and backed Nigeria aggression against the secessionist region. Now, the then Labour government secretly provided large quantity of arms to the Nigeria federal government, which by early 1970 had crushed an attempt by the country's eastern region of Biafra to gain independence, which it had declared in May 1967. During the 3 years of war, up to 3 million people died as Nigeria enforced a blockade on Biafran, causing widespread starvation amid considerable international opposition to the conflict. British policy was mainly shaped by its oil interest. Declassified government documents from the time show our direct interest are trade and investment, including an important stake by Shell BP in the eastern region, the Foreign Office noted a few days before the outbreak of the war in 1967. Investment by Shell BP, then a joint company in Nigeria, which was partly owned by the British government, amounted to around 200 million pounds at the time. The company was the largest producer of oil in Nigeria, most of which was in Biafra. Shall have much to lose if the FMG, Federal Military Government, do not achieve the expected victory, George Thomas, Labour's Commonwealth Minister, noted in August 1967. He added, the sole immediate British interest in Nigeria is that the Nigeria economy should be brought back to a condition in which our substantial trade and investment in the country can be further developed, and particularly so we can regain access to important oil installation. I hope you are listening. UK supplies of arms, which eventually enabled the Nigeria government to win the war, including millions of rounds of ammunition, hundreds of machine guns and grenades, thousands of mortar and artillery bombs, aircraft and armored personnel carrier. The supplies were massively stepped up while Labour Prime Minister Harold Wilson was telling Parliament that Britain was supplying arms to Nigeria at the same level as before. He made the false claim that there was no special provision for the war. The decision to supply arms and ammunition were taken at the time when it was clear they were being used against civilians. Wilson's agreement to supply petrol boat in 1967 was done in the knowledge that this would help the government maintain the sea blockade against the Biafran people. This is the map that you are seeing. I am scrolling. Now, we continue to read. Declaration of war. Declaration of war. The Nigeria government under General Yakubu Jack Gowon, who had seized power in a military coup in July 1966, began military operation to defeat the Biafran secessionists in July 1967. His well-equipped federal army of over 85,000 men, supplied by Britain and the Soviet Union, among others, took on a volunteer Biafran force under Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, the military governor of the Eastern region, much of whose equipment initially came from captured Nigeria supplies. In the run-up to Gowon's declaration of war, British officials made clear to the Nigeria government that they supported the country unity. Labour Minister George Thomas told the Nigeria High Commissioner in London in April 1967, for example, the federal government had our sympathy and our full support, but hoped the use of force against the East could be avoided. Britain initially refused Gowon's request for military support to target Biafran ports. Okay, interesting. By June 1967, however, the new British High Commissioner in Lagos, Sir David Hunt, wrote in a memo to London that the only way of preserving unity of Nigeria is to remove Ojukwu by force. He said the Biafra leader was committed to remaining the ruler of an independent state and reiterated that the UK interest lay in firmly supporting the federal government. On 1 July 1967, Gowon asked Britain for jet fighter and bomber aircraft, 6 fast boats, and 24 anti-aircraft guns. Britain rejected the aircraft and boat but agreed to supply the anti-aircraft guns. The Deputy High Commissioner in Enugu, Biafran's main city, noted that that supplying the anti-aircraft guns would be seen as the British backing for the Gowon regime, and they could also take on an offensive role if mounted in an invasion fleet. The British government's news department was instructed to treat the defensive nature of the weapon and to avoid publicity on their export from Britain. High Commissioner Sir David Hunt said that it would be better to use civil aircraft to deliver these guns and secure agreement from the Nigeria that there would be no publicity. They were hiding so that the world will not see them because they supported the killing of Biafran people. This is the reason why when we always talk, we don't cease to mention Britain, because Britain killed us indirectly through Nigeria. Now, let's continue. Faced with Gowon complaints about Britain not supplying more arms, Prime Minister Wilson agreed in mid-July to supply him with the fast patrol boat, in the knowledge they would help the government maintain the blockade against Biafra. Help the government maintain the blockade against Biafran people. Did you see that? That was what caused the genocide that took the life of more than 3 million people. Women and children, to be precise, non-combatants. And we are here talking about the genocide that is being committed in the Middle East. No one has been held to account. No one has been called for questioning after this war, after this genocide was committed against us. Now, we continue to read the documentary. Wilson wrote to go on saying that we have demonstrated in many ways our support for your government as the legal government of Nigeria and our refusal to recognize the secession. Wilson also told Gowon that Britain does not intend to put any obstacle in the way of orders for reasonable quantities of military material of types similar to those you have obtained here in the past. By early November 1967, Nigeria government forces had pushed back the Biafrans and captured Enugu. George Thomas now called for a quick FMG victory. George Thomas celebrated FMG victory. The Prime Minister of Britain, as at that time, and recommended that the UK arms export policy towards Lagos be relaxed to ensure that outcome. On 23 November 1967, the cabinet agreed that such a federal military victory provided the best hope for an early end of the fighting. They wanted to fight that war so quickly. It doesn't matter how many women and children that are going to die in that war, but they were willing to end it quickly that they may come in and do their oil investment in the region of Biafra. And they had achieved it. Armed supplies. The following month, Commonwealth Secretary George Thompson suggested the UK should agree to Gowon's shopping list for an arms supply. He wrote, anything that we now do to assist the federal FMG should help our oil companies to re-establish and expand their activities in Nigeria after the war. Did you hear that? Only for them to re-establish their company. That's why they supported the genocide and block every consequences that may come after that. Now, more generally should help, he said that after the war, and more generally should help our commercial and political relationship with post-war Nigeria. Did you see how Britain has a lot of role to play in Nigeria? The reason why Britain is actually in control of what happens in Nigeria, the reason why you must go to Chatham House when you want to become a leader of Nigeria, because Britain gave you everything that killed Biafra. Britain kept it secret. Britain continued to protect Nigeria from the consequences of the genocide committed against the Biafran people. That is the reason why Britain is still in control of everything that happens in Nigeria. It is not actually a mere talk. It is the reality. I'm reading it from Daily Maverick. Now let's continue to read. As a result, Britain supplied 36 armored personnel carrier along with 2,000 machine guns for them, anti-tank guns, and 9 million rounds of ammunition. 9 million. Dennis Healy, the defense secretary, wrote that he hoped these supplies would encourage the Nigerians to look to the United Kingdom for their future purchases of defense equipment. Interest. By mid-1968, Britain had supplied 15 million rounds of ammunition, 21,000 mortar bombs, 42,500 howitzer rounds, 1,950 rifles with grenade launchers, 15,000 IBS of explosive, 500 submachine guns, 4,000 rifle and 4 helicopters. These ammunitions were secretly stepped up at a time when the killings were being widely reported in the press. About 1,000 people of the Igbo ethnic group who predominated in Biafra were killed in Benin City by local people with the acquiescence of the federal government forces. The New York Review noted in December 1967, a further 700 Igbo males were lined up and shot in the town of Asaba. Genocide. In January 1968, the Observer reported at the time, according to eyewitness, the Nigeria commander ordered the execution of every Igbo male over the age of 10 in the town. What genocide is actually bigger than this? The Convention 1948, 9th of December 1948, stated that any genocide that is targeting a particular group, organization, racial or religious, due to religious dispute. That is exactly lining up 700 Igbo male and giving an ultimatum that they will execute, or they should start executing every Igbo male over the age of 10 in town. Did you hear that? Now, humanitarian suffering, especially starvation, was severe as a result of the federal government blockade of Biafra. Pictures of starving and of malnourished children went around the world, and the Nigeria government was widely seen to be engaging in atrocities against civilians, including apparently discriminate airstrikes in an increasingly brutal war. By the beginning of 1968, British files referred to the death of between 70,000 to 100,000 people in the war. The Red Cross estimated there was around 600,000 refugees in Biafra and was trying to arrange supplies to meet needs, estimated at around 30 tons a day. Okay. Public and parliamentary pressure in Britain to hold arm export to Lagos was now rising, with 70 Labour MPs filing a motion for an embargo in May 1968. Yet the real extent of arms supply by Britain was concealed from the public by the government. Throughout 1967 and 1968, Labour minister told Parliament that Britain was essentially neutral in the conflict and was continuing to supply arms to Nigeria on the same basis as before the war. Wilson misinformed the House of Commonwealth. Okay, the House of Commons on the 16th May 1968 that we have continued the supply of arms by private manufacturers in this country, exactly on the basis that it has been in the past. But there has been no special provision for the needs of the war. That was the lie they told to the House of Commons, who were concerned about the images that was coming out of Biafra land. Now, let's continue. With the forces of Gowon regime in control of Port Harcourt, Biafran's most important southern coastal city, By mid-1968, British officials noted that having gone this far in supporting the federal military government, it will be a pity to throw away the credit we have built up with them, just when they seem to have the upper hand. Britain, Britain. Hey, there is God. Oh. Britain could not hold the supply of arms, since such an outcome would seriously put at risk about 200 million of British investment in non-Biafra Nigeria. Just Thompson explained to Harold Wilson in private. Did you see that? Interest over human life, psychological warfare, which is the reason why so many Biafrans are, sick today. Psychological sick that many of them does not even know how sick they are. Psychological warfare. It was at this point that British officials sought to counter widespread public opposition to the Nigeria government by helping it improve the presentation of its policy. British officials urged the Nigeria government to convince the outside world that it was not engaged in genocide and to suggest it backed a ceasefire and humanitarian access to Biafrans. High Commissioner Hunt suggested to Gowon that the Federal Air Force be used for psychological warfare and to drop leaflets over Biafrans towns, which would help the government score a propaganda point. They dropped leaflets over Biafra towns, which would help the government score a propaganda point. And who was now pushing the propaganda? BBC, because they were the media that was on ground. Other officials noted that their support for Nigeria was under attack and that our ability to sustain it depends on very much on implementing enlightened and humane federal policy and securing public recognition for them. They argued that what was needed was good and well presented Nigerian policies which permit that support to continue. The file indicates that these presentational issues were much more important to British officials, than the suffering of Biafrans. The Wilson government was mainly concerned that it would be forced by the public pressure to withdraw or reduce its support for Gowon. It ruled out threatening to cut off or reduce arms export to press the Nigeria government to change policy. By early August 1968, federal Nigeria forces had taken most of the southeast of the country, and the Biafran were now confined to a small enclave, blockaded from the outside world. Did you see the genocide? This is the second genocide committed. First one was killing every child, male children, emasculate Biafra people. Every male children that is from 10 years old and above, they must be massacred. That was the instruction given by the Nigeria government that is sponsored by Britain. The second one was barricading of food supply. Now you see that they actually pushed Biafran people to a small enclave and maintain the barricade and make them not to see the outside world or have access to the outside world, that they may die of hunger and starvation. Psychological warfare. That's what they did to us. Labour's, we continue to read. Labour's and other Commonwealth Minister Lord Shepherd minuted Harold Wilson, saying that 14 months after Biafra declared itself independent, our support for the federal military government finds us in the position in which we are on a comparatively good terms with the side, which is in an overwhelmingly advantageous position. The same month, the Red Cross estimated that 2.3 million people were in the dire need, facing shortage of food and medical aid. Those 2.3 million, they died. It was covered. But we continue to read. Wilson did not succumb to the growing public pressure. The month after the Red Cross dire warning, he told Go On, the British government for their part have steadfastly maintained their policy of support for federal Nigeria and have resisted all suggestion in Parliament and in the press for a change in the policy, particularly in regard to arms supplies. The Foreign Office again made clear its primary interest. The whole of our investment in Nigeria, and particular our oil interest in the southeast, where they are killing people, and the Midwest will be at risk if we change our policy of support for the federal government, because they know if there was no Britain, Biafra will win the war. Biafra will win the war. By their confession here, you will understand that Biafra was going to win the war if there was no Britain. Now let's continue. Covert military supplies via Yemen. They changed their military supply through Yemen. Now let us continue. In November 1968, a group of parliament in the Committee for Peace in Nigeria met Harold Wilson and urged him to hold arms sales and press for a ceasefire, estimating that there will be 2 million deaths from starvation and disease. And it happened by the end of the year, which is taking it to 1969. 2 million deaths. It was more than that. Estimate. Now, that's why when we tell you more than 3.5 million women and children was killed, in that war, people might be seeing it as a fallacy. But by the estimate of this analysis and the confession, you will actually see exactly the side of our story, how authentic it has been. Wilson rebuffed this plea and 2 days later agreed to supply Nigeria with aircraft for the first time in a covert deal. The files show the Nigeria had long pressed Britain to supply jet aircraft, specifically to attack the runways used by Biafran forces for military purposes, but which were also used to deliver humanitarian aid. Wilson said that the Britain could not supply this directly, but there were such aircraft in South Yemen and Sudan, previously exported by Britain. The Nigerians, he said, should procure the aircraft from them, which would not directly involve the British government. Wow. Oh, wow. The British company that arranged the deal was Airwork, which was later to be used by the UK government to conceal its involvement in its covert war in Yemen. The British government also agreed to put the Nigerians in touch with suitable pilots, to kill us. British arms supplies were stepped up again later in the same month. Foreign Secretary Michael Stewart said the Nigeria could have a further 40,000 more mortar bombs and 2,000 rifles Some 36 million rounds of ammunition had also been supplied in the last few months. In the last few months alone. You may tell Gowon, Stewart instructed High Commissioner Hunt in Lagos, that we are certainly ready to consider a further application to supply similar arms in the future. He concluded, if there is anything else for ground warfare which you think they needed and which would help speed up the end of the fighting, please let us know and we will consider urgently whether we can supply it. They want to finish us as quick as possible so that they will come and occupy our land with their businesses. At the same time, the Foreign Office was instructing its mission around the world to provide disinformation about the extent of this arms supply. Disinformation. The BBC, when BBC come and tell us a disinformation center, disinformation this. But you see how Britain propagated disinformation against our people, against our parents. They died in this war. It sent a memo to diplomatic post on 22 November stating that we wish to discourage the suggestion that the Nigerians, in their recent meeting with British officials, were seeking to negotiate massive arms deal. Rather, our policy of supplying in a reasonable quantity is to be expected. In the recent pattern of supply is to be expected. Resisting pressure. By the last 2 months of 1968, with hundreds of thousands now dead, the fighting had reached a stalemate. The federal government had taken all Biafran territory apart from a small enclave consisting of 3 million people in an area the size of the British county of Kent. Biafrans were dependent on 2 airstrips for outside supply, which were limited by both Gowon's and Ojukwu's refusal to allow sufficient number of aircraft to land. Humanitarian agencies were continuing calls for a ceasefire as suffering, especially starvation, had reached crisis proportion. However, Wilson told Gowon in November, we shall continue to maintain our present policy despite this heavy pressure on us. Foreign Secretary Stewart instructed Lord Shepherd on a visit to Lagos to tell Gowon of the extraordinary steps Britain was taking to support him. Gowon should realize, Stewart said, that opposition to British policy cuts right across the normal political or party division in the country and is especially strong in the various churches. Now you see the reason why Gowon, as a result of that favor done to Nigeria, Nigeria is now being controlled by Britain. And the same people they killed, they committed genocide against, are now still under this control of Britain. What a pity. What a pity. When an Igbo man, Ishekiri man, Igodomi Igodo, when all these our coastal brothers, they will tell you they are not Biafrans, they are not Igbos. When they will actually say they are proud to be a Nigeria. Any people from the old eastern region who will open their mouth to tell you they are proud Nigerians, that person is a coward. Their parents died for nothing. Their parents were killed for nothing. That's what they are proving. It's a proven fact. Anybody who does not recognize what genocide these people committed against our people, and they are telling themselves that they are proud Nigerians, those people, they have a sickness. And that sickness might be Stockholm Syndrome. It might be even worse than Stockholm Syndrome. It is not ordinary thing that somebody who will see all this report and they will tell themselves they are proud to be a Nigeria that is controlled by Britain, who supplied everything that they used to kill your own relatives, your own parents, that you are proud of. Let's finalize the reading. He also said that a similar feeling is also expressed within the cabinet itself, suggesting that British support for Nigeria was being provided on a very thin basis. The Wilson government was also keen to present itself engaged in the search for peace. The file showed that officials understood that a failure to appear to be active on this front made it harder to publicly justify their support for the Nigeria government. Have you seen how they were faking the peace? Faking the peace. The British government policy sought to avoid the involvement of the United Nations in peace negotiation and was intended to support Nigeria to achieve a solution on its terms only. Wow. The government's public statement consistently blamed the Biafrans but not the federal government for the obstructing peace negotiation and the delivery of humanitarian aid. The government in Lagos feared that the Biafrans would use the cover of humanitarian aid supply to slip in arms deliveries. That's where they have faked it. While they did it deliberately. While the Biafrans believed the federal government would poison the supply. The leaders of both sides were responsible for the failure to deliver adequate humanitarian aid, but starvation of the Biafrans was no accident or simply a byproduct of the war. It was a deliberate policy of the Gowon regime. Oh, the truth will finally come out. Let us read the disinformation they perpetrated against our people. The disinformation they pushed against our people. We had no media. But today, we have our own media. Now let us read this and we now go back to the real business of the day. By March 1969, Wilson continued to misinform the public that we continue to supply on a limited scale arms, no bombs, no aircraft to the government of Nigeria because we have always been their suppliers. Not only was this untrue, as a result of the agreement late the previous year, on the very same day as this interview, the government approved the export of 9 million rounds of ammunition, 10,000 grenades, and 39,000 mortar bombs to kill the remaining 3 million Biafrans. A day before the Wilson interview, a Foreign Office official privately wrote that we have over the last few months agreed to supply large quantities of arms and ammunition to Nigeria to assist them in finishing the war in the absence of any further peace negotiation. He also noted that we have flown small arms ammunition to Nigeria using Manston Airport in Kent without attracting unfavorable press comment. It was perhaps no surprise that Gowon could write to Wilson in April, saying that of all the governments in the Western world, yours has remained the only one that has openly maintained its policy of arms supply to my government. France, Belgium, and Netherlands, among others, had all announced to hold while the U.S. continued its policy of not supplying arms to either side. Wow. 2 senior Royal Air Force officers secretly visited Nigeria in August 1969 to advise the government on how they could better prosecute the air war. The main British interest the file make clear was to better protect the oil installation, but the brief for the 2 officers stated that this impression should not be given to the Nigerians. They did not even tell Gowon the reason why they are supplying this. They want to establish their business. But the Gowon, a young and naive soldier who is actually very wicked, mean, was doing the bidding to invite Britain to come and have benefit as he is killing his fellow black people, just to pave way for Britain to come in, because he has no sense or no brain. Now, let's continue. The officers subsequently advised Nigeria commanders on neutralization of the rebel airstrips. It was understood that the destruction of the airstrips would put them out of use for daylight humanitarian relief flights, although it is not clear whether the specific British advice was put in action. This one, sticking to our guns. In December 1969, just the federal government's final push that crushed the Biafrans, Foreign Secretary Michael Stewart was still calling for stepping up military assistance even further. The British supplies, he wrote, have undoubtedly been the most effective weapons in the ground war and have spearheaded all the major federal advances. When Biafran resistance ended in mid-January 1970, Wilson sent another private message to Gowon saying that your army has won a decisive victory and achieved your great aim of preserving the unity and integrity of Nigeria. He added, as you know, I and my colleagues have believed all along that you were right, and we have never wavered in our support for you. Your government and your policy, despite the violent attack which have been made on us at times in Parliament and in the press as well as overseas. The Deputy High Commissioner in Lagos added, there is genuine gratitude, as indeed there should be, for what Britain has done and is still doing for the country, and in particular for Her Majesty's government courage in literally sticking to their guns over Biafra. Sticking to their guns over Biafra. The toll of the war was assessed in a report for the British High Commission. At the end of the month, it mentioned that up to 2 million people were being fed with food relief supplies, around 700 of whom were refugees in camps dependent entirely on food aid. 3 million refugees were crowded into a 2,500 square kilometer enclave in Biafra, where not only food but medicine, housing and clothing were in short supply. The Biafran economy was shattered, cities were in ruin, and schools, hospitals, and transport facilities destroyed. Tell me which war destroyed hospital? Which war destroyed schools? Did you see the reason why South Africa saw what is happening in Gaza Strip is genocide? because there was a report that schools, hospitals were bombed. That's where they see the genocide. But now, this was what happened to our parents. The schools, hospital were bombed, destroyed. Barricading that we will not have access to food supplies. Our people died of hunger and starvation while Britain was maintaining their misinformation. Now, having read all that and having given the world the information about what transpired during the Biafra War, 1967 to 1970, no one was taken to ICJ. No one was taken to International Court of Justice, even though it has been established in 1948. Now Nigeria, because they know that they premeditated this war, they planned this war ahead of time with Britain, they did not become the signatory of the Genocide Convention. They only became the signatory of Genocide Convention in 2009. In the year 2009. That was the only time Nigeria found it, interesting to become, they found their interest in becoming a signatory to the Genocide Convention. Let me show you when they joined. Even Section 9 of the Genocide Convention stated, stated unequivocally against the act of Nigeria, Nigeria became a signatory to this convention in July 27, 2009. July 27, 2009. Every other countries joined very many years ago, including Ghana, South Africa. All of them joined in 90s. Nigeria joined in 21st century. Nigeria joined in 20th century. That's when Nigeria joined. In 20th century. Now, I want you to see exactly the reason why we have complained about the support that Nigeria secretly through their bloc gave to South Africa against Israel. With, of course, we know that the claim there is that Israel is committing a genocide. Now, it is laughable for Nigeria, having understood their history of genocide committed against Biafran. They hid themselves behind the IOC. Is it OIC? Organization of Islamic State. Because Nigeria has been declared an Islamic State, which many people are still in the denial of it. But the reality of it is what I showed you from the beginning of this broadcast. So now, having seen and having heard what Nigeria committed against Biafran people, I question myself, all these lawyers that claim that they have taken the case to ICC, taken the case to ICJ, what is the outcome? Does it mean that this ICJ and all this does not have a teeth to bite? Because whether or not it happened before Nigeria joined, they become the signatory to the Genocide Convention, it can still be prosecutable. Now, and secondly, it is not only genocide. When Mazen Nnamdi Kanu began to march in Biafra land, Nigeria army committed genocide against him. Asaba massacre and Mbo massacre. Mazen Nnamdi Kanu's house massacre. So this is genocide. It is still prosecutable. Now the same Nigeria is holding Mazen Nnamdi Kanu in arbitrary detention. If you think about from the beginning of the war, you will understand that the war was never about protecting the integrity of Nigeria, because Biafra was joined with Nigeria by Britain. And Biafra decided that they do not want to be part of Nigeria. They ceded from Nigeria, and Nigeria brought war against her. It is not as if Biafrans went and fired the first shot. We never fired the first shot. Nigeria fired the first shot. We tried to protect ourselves. That was what happened. We were never the aggressor that Britain made us to be. Britain called us the aggressor, that they may establish their oil companies and businesses, that they may control the region created by one of their own, Lord Lugard, in 1914. Now, it is very, very imperative for the world to see the hypocrisy of Nigeria and the hypocrisy of Britain amongst other nations of the world. We have suffered genocide, and the Genocide Convention Treaty has been signed many years before this genocide started. So now the question is, who is to be held to account on the basis of this genocide committed against the Biafran people? Who is going to be held, or who is going to be held accountable? It becomes very crucial for us to consider going to ICJ to establish our case, not with biased lawyers, not with social media lawyers, but with the real lawyers who understand. The real lawyers, such as the lawyers that South Africa used to go and establish their litigation against the Israel. You saw how brave they were. Without missing any of their word, they presented their case. Those are the type of lawyers we need to present our own case in the International Court of Justice against the genocide committed against the Biafran people, against Nigeria on the genocide committed against the Biafran people. These are the steps that we must take. These are the moves that we must make. There are a lot of things that need to be done. Like I said, we're not going to be using media lawyers. They could give themselves different name from US. We're not going to be using media lawyers. We will use the real lawyers to go and establish our own case against the Nigeria state. They are signatory to it, so the case is now even better and stronger if we present it properly. So great and wonderful people and lovers of freedom all over the world, this is our story. This is the reason why I said that the Nigeria supporting South Africa is laughable, because you cannot be an oppressor. You are advocating for an oppressed or another oppressed. You cannot do that. It is not possible. And we must let our voices heard for the sake of those who paid the price in 1967 to 1970. Boycott and innovation time. We should reject everything that is controlled by Britain. We should reject everything that is controlled by Britain in the name of Nigeria. Very, very important. And this is where I am going to leave it until we meet again. More analysis is on the way. So, I don't want to actually have time for gossips that is going about. No time for gossips. We must present our case. Very, very important. Bye for now.